What are some events in recorded history that are extremely hard to believe, but without a doubt actually happened? There was a Japanese man called Tsutomu Yamaguchi who was on his way to work in Hiroshima in 1945 when he saw falling through the sky, 2 miles from where he stood, what ultimately turned out to be the atomic bomb. He had just enough time to take cover in a ditch as the bomb detonated, and miraculously he survived. Somehow the Hiroshima train station was still operational, and so Yamaguchi, battered, bombed and bruised, decided to board a train to his family home so he could recover in Nagasaki. 3 days later Yamaguchi was called into work to explain what he saw, which he did. At work, as he began to tell the story of what happened, the second bomb dropped. It was the reinforced concrete walls around him that saved him this time, and Yamaguchi quickly ran to find his wife and son. Ground temperatures in the city reached 4,000 degrees Celsius and radioactive rain poured down. The family's home was destroyed, but Yamaguchi's wife and son had thankfully been out shopping, looking for burn ointment for Yamaguchi, when the bomb fell, and they'd survived. Despite this ordeal of having survived 2 nuclear explosions and subsequent radiation exposure, Yamaguchi went on to live till 93 years of age. He died in 2010 after being recognized by the Japanese government as a Eniju Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person. The family's home was destroyed, but Yamaguchi's wife and son had thankfully been out shopping, looking for burn ointment for Yamaguchi, when the bomb fell, and they'd survived. Didn't know about this part. I suppose it would have been quite the kick to the nuts if they perished and he'd survived twice. It's honestly amazing to think that had he died at Hiroshima, his wife and son likely would have died at Nagasaki as a result, as there would have been no reason to be in the outskirts of the city that day. His good-fortuned horrible experience ultimately saved his family via butterfly effect. That reminds me of another famous Japanese person during that time. Chune Sugihara was the vice-consul for the Japanese embassy in Lithuania, which is in Europa, during WW2. Many Jews came to him for help because they wanted to flee from the ever-expanding Nazi Empire, and he just gave them all visas. He wasn't supposed to do that, and in fact he got in trouble with his government for it. But by the time he was recalled to Japan, he had already saved many thousands of lives. The Jews then took the Trans-Siberian Railway and a boat to get to Japan. Today, he is of course no longer around, but he is one of the righteous among the nations. In 1908 Russia showed up 12 days late to the Olympics because the world switched calendars while they did not. To accommodate the Russian team, some events were rescheduled so that the Russian athletes could participate. This led to a longer duration for those Olympics, which lasted from April 27 to October 31, making it the longest Olympic Games in history. I love that they just waited for them, lol. Why didn't they just go when they saw they were late? My brain before realizing there wasn't TV or international flights in 1908. Michael Malloy aka Mike the Durable aka Iron Mike. During the Great Depression, 5 men took out a life insurance policy on a homeless alcoholic that they were sure was going to drink himself to death. The owner of a bar allowed him to drink for free, but he kept drinking and didn't die. So they tried to poison him with antifreeze. Didn't work. The turpentine, horse liniment, rat poison, methanol. Still didn't work. A sandwich made with rotten sardines and tacks. Still no luck. Then they took his drunk body out in the cold and poured water on him. He lived. Then they ran him over with a car. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks, but survived. Then they poisoned him with carbon monoxide, and he finally died. They were all convicted of murder. So they tried to poison him with antifreeze. Fun fact, ethyl alcohol is an antidote to ethylene glycol poisoning. They both bind to the same receptors, are metabolized by the same enzyme, but alcohol takes priority. A serious alcoholic, when drunk, would just pass the glycol through their system with no issue. Gonna start an alcohol addiction just so no one can kill me with antifreeze. The Irish potato famine, 1845 to 1849, was a huge catastrophe that resulted in 1 million dying from starvation and 1 million leaving their homeland, mostly for North America. It's really hard to put into words how scarring this famine was for so many Irish people, and the suffering was tremendous. The psychological scars still impact Ireland's psyche today. It almost sounds like a fairy tale to hear how a sultan from a faraway land heard of this tragedy and went out of his way to send ships crammed with food and medicine to the Irish people dying from hunger and disease. When Ottoman Sultan Abdulmajid heard of the suffering from his Irish dentist, he felt great compassion and sorrow for the plight of the Irish. The The Sultan originally wanted to donate £10,000 to the starving populace, but British diplomats were aghast to hear this because Queen Victoria had donated a small sum of £2,000. The British government refused to accept the large donation, so he only donated a measly sum of £1,000, but he secretly sent 5 ships loaded with food. As you can imagine, the British government wasn't happy to hear of this, and the Navy attempted a blockade to stop the aid from arriving. The ships made it through the lines and arrived at Drogheda, Ireland, where they dispersed the food. The people of Drogheda were so thankful that they had the Islamic and Ottoman symbols added to their city's coat of arms. It really does read like a fairy tale and is a gesture of great empathy. It's easy to imagine how happy the starving people were to see those Turkish ships arriving with food. According to James Hack-Tuke, people were living, or rather starving, upon turnip tops, sand eels and seaweed, a diet which no one in England would consider fit for the meanest animal. But the story does not end there. During the Crimean War, Britain joined the Ottoman Empire in their fight against the expanding Russian Empire. About 30,000 Irish soldiers served in the war, and it was noticed that the Irish people served enthusiastically in defense of the Sultan who had helped them during their greatest times of need. This highest form of compassion was even remembered during the First World War. It was reported that British officers complained that the Irish lacked the will to fight against the Ottomans, who remembered stories of the Ottoman Empire helping during a famine when no one else would. Sultan Abdulmajid is a model of faith in humanity being restored. There was no famine. The British took Irish crops to feed themselves and quash Irish independence. It was an act of genocide. In 1847, the Choctaw people raised money to send. This was actually repaid recently, too. A few tribes had sent over money, and a few years ago, they were barred from entering Ireland with native IDs for the lacrosse tournament, a Native American sport. Ireland basically told customs to fuck off because they'd helped during the famine and they invented the sport. Nicholas Alcamaide fell 18,000 feet without a parachute from a burning plane in 1944 and suffered no serious injury. I see how the snow cover helped, but how he didn't get skewered by pine trees or break a single bone is shocking. Imagine what he was thinking when he got up from that fall. What kind of crazy thoughts were running through his head? Yeah, no one is gonna believe this one. Whoa, am I immortal? If you are ever in that situation, dense pine trees are about the best thing you can hope. Only thing better is dense pine trees in an area with fresh or powder snow. Trees' branches typically are thinnest at the top, and every branch you hit on the way down transfers your momentum in increments. Typically you'll still die. And double typically you'll at least break your legs. And triple typically you would still succumb to your wounds in the wilderness before rescue. On second thought, aim for the pavement. That time everyone died of a dancing sickness where they danced themselves to death in France. Mass hysteria. Yup. St. Vitus dance, as it is called, still doesn't have a definitely known cause, if I remember correctly, either. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, please. New research as of 2021 shows sydenham-chorea as the most likely cause. brainandlife.org/articles/sydenham-chorea-st-vitus-dance-name. John O'Neill, the FBI agent in charge of investigating Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden in the 1990s, grew frustrated with the bureaucratic politics within the FBI and between the FBI and CIA that he felt hampered his mission. He decided to leave the FBI and take a higher-paying job in the private sector. In August 23, 2001, he became the chief of security at the World Trade Center. He was killed in the attacks just a few weeks later. My colleague was on the plane to Hawaii where the entire top of the plane ripped off. They flew the rest of the way without any overhead. Landed and everyone walked off. Absolutely insane to see the pictures. Talk about being given a second chance. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 for those not familiar with it. Not only could kids now not believe it, the public couldn't hardly believe it at the time. Only one death, a flight attendant who wasn't buckled in a seat at the time the roof ripped off. My FIL was on a flight. He always keeps his seat belt on unless getting up for some reason. Lady beside him made a comment, "You can take your seat belt off now." He told her he never does unless it's necessary, said you never know if something's going to happen and you don't want to be trying to get buckled in an emergency. She said, "You know what? That makes a lot of sense," and she buckled back up. An hour later they hit some nasty turbulence and the plane dropped like a rock, forget how many feet, but it was substantial. The drop was so fast that the flight attendant and her cart smashed against the ceiling and then dropped back down. He said he was sure he was done for. Other passengers not buckled in also hit the ceiling. Many people had bumps and bruises, and I think at least one had a broken arm. The lady beside him just kept thanking him over and over for convincing her to stay buckled. The incident was in the news, and he got 2 free flights out of it as an apology. I still find it totally insane that we were able to put men on the moon with the technology of the time. It blows my mind. Probably the greatest of all human achievement. Isn't that insane? They were hand-checking the fucking math. Edwin Booth, brother of John Wilkes Booth, saved the life of Robert, the son of President Abraham Lincoln. Top 10 anime redemption arcs be like. Halley's Comet appeared in the sky when Mark Twain was born in 1835. The comet moves in a 75 or 76-year orbit, and, as it neared Earth once again, Twain said, "I came in with Halley's Comet and I expect to go out with it." Sure enough, he died on April 21, 1910, just as the comet made its next pass within sight of Earth. The Battle of Bull Run, one of the first battles of the U.S. Civil War, occurred on and around Wilmer McLean's farm in Northern Virginia. Not wanting to live surrounded by war, McLean and his family moved to Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The Battle of Appomattox Courthouse was the last significant battle between Union and Confederate forces. The Confederates signed the surrender order in Wilmer's sitting room. It is said that the Civil War started on Wilmer's farm and ended in his sitting room. When the pyramids were being built, woolly mammoths still existed. The last use of the guillotine in France was the same year Star Wars was founded. 1816, the year without summer. Theodore Roosevelt found his boat was stolen. So he built a new boat, tracked the thieves down and arrested them. He then proceeded to walk them multiple days, without sleeping, so they could receive a trial instead of just shooting them on the spot. It was in the middle of a harsh winter, so he didn't handcuff them, for fear they'd get frostbite, so instead he just kept himself awake by reading Tolstoy with a gun trained on them the whole trek. Palm trees, among other flora, were present in Antarctica during the early Eocene epoch, between 55 and 48 million years ago. Only somewhat related, I just read an article about an extinct type of date palm that they found seeds of that are 2,000 years old, and thieves recently managed to grow 6 palms, 4 male and 2 female, from them, and thus have brought back an extinct species of palm tea and its fruit. So cool. Christmas Day 1914. The truce on the WW1 battlefields shows the humanity inside everyone, but they were able to wake up the next day and go straight back to war, kill the men that they'd spent a sincere day with. The time Indiana tried to legislate the value of pi. Forbes.com/sites//02/04/025/Indiana's-state-legislature-once-tried-to-legislate-the-value-of-pi/. Sha equals 6A6999B1A260A. In 1903, the New York Times published an article about flying machines. They stated that it would take the combined efforts of all mathematicians and mechanics 1 to 10 million years for powered flight to be achieved. Anyway, about 9 weeks later, the Wright brothers achieved powered flight for the first time. Here is the article. They were also overly cynical afterwards. In 1910 they said that flight would only ever be for billionaires. Of course, we had commercial flights by around the 60s achievable for many. In 2019, a convicted murderer on day release bravely fought off a terrorist at London Bridge with a gnarled tusk. BBC. Co. UK Inusi UK F50870309. On the 24th of June, 2023, the most important Russian mercenary group marched on Moscow, just to give up a few hours later. In 2014, Pope Francis released doves in the Vatican to symbolize his hopes for peace in the world. As soon as the doves began to fly, a seagull and a crow swooped down and attacked them in front of everyone. Google.com/amp/s/amp. TheGuardian.com/world/201//jan//pope-doves-attack-by-crow-seagull-st-peters-square. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919 that took place in Boston, Massachusetts. 40-foot wave that killed 21 people. Elevator operator Betty Lou Oliver survived a fall of 75 stories while in an elevator in 1945. A U.S. President Roosevelt issued an executive order that made it illegal for U.S. citizens to keep U.S. gold coins. They made everyone return them or be subject to imprisonment and large fine. The government confiscated over 2,600 metric tons. Google.com/search ? Q equals gold plus confiscation plus us and RLZ equals 1C1 SQJL_ENUS 949 US 949 and oak equals gold plus confis and axe equals chrome. 2.0 I512 J69057 J0 I512 L8.8700 J1 J7 and Sorcered equals chrome and IE equals UTF-8.